When little Sophie spoke about music, everyone always said, "You're just a child, be quiet." But the brave step she took at Elvis's concert and the talent she displayed would prove to the whole world that age is just a number and true talent always shows itself. The Grand Ole Opry house in Nashville buzzed with an energy that seemed to make the very walls vibrate with anticipation. It was a crisp October evening in 1976, and 15,000 devoted fans had gathered to witness what many considered the most prestigious venue in country music, host the king of rock and roll himself, Elvis Presley. The iconic circular stage, which had seen legends like Hank Williams and Patsy Cline grace its boards, was about to welcome Elvis for a special televised performance that would be broadcast live across the nation. Sophie Martinez sat in the fourth row, her small 9-year-old frame practically bouncing with excitement despite the stern looks from the adults around her. Her father, Carlos Martinez, was a guitar technician for the venue, and this rare opportunity to see Elvis perform was Sophie's reward for maintaining straight A's in school and helping her father with instrument maintenance throughout the summer. Unlike most children her age who might have been more interested in the spectacle and glamour, Sophie found herself captivated by the technical aspects of the performance setup. The stage was a masterpiece of engineering and artistry. Multiple guitars hung on stands, each one carefully tuned and positioned for quick changes during the performance. Sophie's trained eye, developed through countless hours spent in her father's workshop, took in every detail. She noticed the precise positioning of the amplifiers, the careful routing of cables, and most importantly, the subtle variations in guitar setups that most people would never even consider. Sophie's relationship with music had been complicated from the very beginning. Born into a family where her father worked with instruments daily, she had developed an extraordinary ear for pitch and tone at an unusually young age. By the time she was 6, Sophie could identify when an instrument was even slightly out of tune, often correcting professional musicians who initially dismissed her observations as the imaginative comments of a child. This gift, however, had become more of a burden than a blessing in Sophie's young life. Teachers at school would roll their eyes when Sophie pointed out that the piano in the music room was a quarter tone flat on the middle C. Her mother's friends would exchange knowing glances and say things like, "Children have such active imaginations," when Sophie would comment on pitch problems during church services. Even her own extended family had grown tired of what they perceived as a know-it-all attitude from someone who was too young to understand real music. The constant dismissal had made Sophie increasingly reluctant to share her observations, even when she was absolutely certain she was correct. She had learned to bite her tongue when she heard problems that others couldn't detect, choosing silence over the inevitable eye rolls and patronizing comments that seemed to follow whenever she spoke up about musical issues. Tonight, however, felt different. There was something magical about being in the Grand Ole Opry, surrounded by the history and legacy of American music. Sophie felt a connection to this place that went beyond her years, as if the walls themselves were encouraging her to trust her instincts and embrace her unique gift. Carlos Martinez had been working at the Grand Ole Opry for over a decade, building a reputation as one of the most meticulous guitar technicians in Nashville. He had worked with country legends, rock stars, and folk singers, but Elvis Presley represented the pinnacle of his career. The technical requirements for Elvis's performance were extraordinarily complex, involving multiple guitar changes, precise timing, and backup instruments ready for any contingency. For the past 3 days, Carlos had been preparing Elvis's guitars with obsessive attention to detail. Each instrument had been restrung with fresh strings, precisely tuned using electronic tuners, and tested through the sound system multiple times. The main performance guitar, a beautiful 1973 Martin D28 acoustic guitar, had received special attention. This particular instrument was Elvis's favorite for intimate moments during his concerts, and Carlos had spent hours ensuring it was perfect. Sophie had been present for much of this preparation. Her curiosity about the technical aspects of music performance talents growing stronger with each passing day. While other children might have been bored by the meticulous process of guitar setup and sound testing, Sophie found herself fascinated by every detail. She watched as her father adjusted string tension, checked intonation, and verified that each fret produced a clear, true tone. What made Sophie's musical ear truly exceptional was not just her ability to detect pitch problems, but her understanding of why those problems occurred. Through observation and her father's patient explanations, she had learned that guitars were delicate instruments affected by temperature, humidity, and the physical stress of performance. She understood that even the best maintained instrument could develop problems during a show, and that identifying these issues quickly was crucial for maintaining a professional performance. As the lights dimmed and the familiar opening strains of Also Sprach Zarathustra filled the Grand Ole Opry house, the audience erupted in thunderous applause. Elvis emerged from the wings, resplendent in a white jumpsuit adorned with intricate gold and silver embroidery that caught the stage lights like stars against the night sky. His presence was magnetic, commanding instant attention from every person in the venue. The king moved with the fluid grace that had made him famous, his voice smooth and powerful as he greeted the Nashville crowd with genuine warmth. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here at the Grand Ole Opry, the mother church of country music." The response was deafening, a wave of love and admiration that seemed to lift Elvis even higher. The first several songs of the set were flawless. Elvis's voice soared over the instrumental accompaniment, his movements mesmerizing the audience as he performed hits like Heartbreak Hotel and Don't Be Cruel. Sophie watched in awe, not just at Elvis's performance, but at how seamlessly all the technical elements worked together to create this spectacular show. But then, as Elvis reached for his acoustic guitar to begin a more intimate portion of the set, disaster began to unfold in a way that only someone with Sophie's exceptional ear could detect. Elvis strapped on the Martin D-28 and began the opening chords of Love Me Tender. But something was wrong. To most of the audience, the music sounded fine, perhaps even perfect. But Sophie immediately detected a subtle but unmistakable problem with the guitar's tuning. The B string was approximately a quarter tone flat, creating a dissonance that made Sophie wince, even though it seemed to bother no one else around her. At first, Sophie thought perhaps Elvis would notice the problem and correct it, as professional musicians often do during performance. But as the song continued, it became clear that either Elvis couldn't hear the issue over the stage monitors, or the problem was so subtle that it wasn't registering as a significant concern. For Sophie, however, the dissonance was becoming increasingly painful to listen to. Her exceptional ear made the out-of-tune strings sound like fingernails on a chalkboard, and she found herself gripping the armrests of her seat as the beautiful melody of Love Me Tender was marred by the tuning problem that apparently only she could detect. The internal struggle that followed represented everything Sophie had experienced throughout her young life. Here was a situation where she knew, with absolute certainty, that something was wrong. Her musical ear, which had been dismissed and ridiculed so many times before, was screaming that the guitar needed immediate attention. But all around her sat thousands of people who seemed perfectly content with the performance, including her own father, who was supposed to be an expert on guitar maintenance. Sophie looked around desperately, hoping to see some sign that others had noticed the problem. Perhaps one of the sound engineers would rush to fix the issue, or maybe Elvis himself would pause to retune. But as the song continued, it became increasingly clear that she was the only person in the entire Grand Ole Opry house who could hear what was wrong. The weight of past dismissals pressed down on Sophie's shoulders like a heavy blanket. How many times had adults told her she was just a child who didn't understand music? How many times had her observations been waved away as the overactive imagination of someone too young to have real musical knowledge? The fear of being embarrassed again, of being told to sit down and be quiet, was almost overwhelming. But there was something else growing inside Sophie, something that had been building through throughout her young life despite all the discouragement. It was the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're right, even when everyone else seems to disagree. It was the understanding that her gift, whether others recognized it or not, was real and valuable. And most importantly, it was the growing realization that sometimes being right means having the courage to speak up, regardless of what others might think. As Elvis continued with "Love Me Tender," the tuning problem seemed to be getting worse. The strings were settling into their new positions, and the flat B string was becoming even more noticeably out of tune. Sophie could see that Elvis was beginning to look slightly uncomfortable, though she wasn't sure if he had identified the specific problem or was just sensing that something wasn't quite right. The song concluded to enthusiastic applause, but Sophie noticed that Elvis looked at his guitar with a slight frown before setting it aside for the next number. This was her moment, she realized. If she was going to act, it had to be now. During the brief pause between songs when Elvis might actually be able to hear her and address the problem, Sophie's heart pounded as she made a decision that would change her life forever. Despite every past experience that told her to stay quiet, despite the voice in her head warning her about embarrassment and rejection, she chose to trust her gift and speak up. Standing up in her fourth-row seat, Sophie called out in her clear, young voice, "Mr. Elvis, sir, your B string is flat." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Conversations throughout the audience stopped mid-sentence as 15,000 people turned to see who had dared to interrupt Elvis Presley's performance. Security guards immediately began moving toward Sophie's location, clearly intending to remove what they assumed was a disruptive child from the venue. Elvis himself stopped mid-motion, his hand frozen halfway to his microphone as he processed what he had just heard. For a moment that felt like an eternity. The Grand Ole Opry house was completely silent, with all eyes focused on the small 9-year-old girl standing bravely in the fourth row. Then, to everyone's amazement, Elvis smiled. It wasn't the practiced performer's smile that he used for the cameras, but a genuine expression of surprise and appreciation. He held up his hand to stop the approaching security guards and walked to the edge of the stage, looking directly at Sophie. "What did you say, young lady?" Elvis asked, his voice carrying clearly through the excellent acoustics of the venue. Sophie felt her knees shaking, but her voice remained steady as she repeated her observation. "Your B string is flat, sir, about a quarter tone." The audience murmured in confusion and some annoyance. Who was this child to tell Elvis Presley how to tune his guitar? Several people around Sophie began making comments about disrespectful children and poor parenting, their voices carrying an edge of irritation at what they perceived as an inappropriate interruption. But Elvis was listening intently. He picked up his guitar and plucked the B string by itself, then frowned as he listened carefully to the tone. He plucked it again, this time in combination with other strings to check the harmony. A look of recognition crossed his face as he realized that the little girl was absolutely right. "Well, I'll be," Elvis said into his microphone, his voice filled with genuine amazement. "This young lady has better ears than most of my sound engineers." The comment drew nervous laughter from the audience, who were still trying to understand what was happening. Elvis began tuning the B string, using the electronic tuner that was discreetly mounted on his guitar strap. As the string came into proper pitch, the difference was subtle but unmistakable to those who knew what to listen for. When he strummed a chord, even audience members without trained ears could hear that something sounded more complete, more harmonious than before. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Elvis asked Sophie, his tone warm and encouraging. "Sophie Martinez, sir," she replied, her voice growing stronger with Elvis's obvious approval. "Well, Sophie Martinez, you just saved this old song from sounding less than perfect. How did you know my guitar was out of tune?" Sophie felt a rush of validation that she had never experienced before. Here was Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll himself, not only acknowledging that she was right, but actually asking for her expertise. "I could hear it, sir." The B string was making the chords sound sad when they should sound happy. The simplicity and accuracy of her explanation drew a genuine laugh from Elvis. "You know what, Sophie? You're absolutely right. Would you like to come up here and help me make sure all my guitars are in tune for the rest of the show?" The invitation was so unexpected that Sophie could hardly believe she had heard correctly. The audience, which had been growing increasingly supportive as they witnessed this remarkable exchange, erupted in encouraging applause. Carlos Martinez, who had been watching the entire interaction with a mixture of pride and amazement, nodded his permission when Sophie looked back at him for approval. Security guards, who moments before had been preparing to escort Sophie out of the venue, now helped her navigate through the crowd and onto the stage. As she climbed the steps to join Elvis, Sophie felt as though she was stepping into a dream. Elvis knelt down to Sophie's eye level when she reached him on stage, his famous smile warm and genuine. "Sophie, I want you to know that in all my years of performing, very few people have ever had the courage to speak up when they heard something wrong, and even fewer have been right when they did. You have a very special gift." The validation in Elvis's words was everything Sophie had hoped for throughout her young life. Here, finally, was recognition from someone who understood the importance of musical precision, someone who appreciated her gift rather than dismissing it. Elvis handed Sophie a second acoustic guitar, identical to the one he had been playing. "I want you to listen to this one and tell me if it sounds right to you." Sophie took the guitar with reverence, understanding the significance of the moment. She strummed a few chords, her small fingers finding the strings with surprising confidence. Her face immediately showed concentration as she listened intently to each note. "The G string is a little sharp," she reported after a moment, "and the high E string sounds like it might go out of tune soon." Elvis tested the guitar himself, and again found Sophie's assessment to be remarkably accurate. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the audience, "I think we've discovered Nashville's youngest guitar technician." The crowd's response was overwhelmingly positive, with people cheering and applauding for the brave little girl who had dared to help Elvis Presley. For Sophie, the moment represented a complete transformation from the dismissed and ridiculed child she had been to a respected young musician whose opinions mattered. Elvis spent the next few minutes working with Sophie to check all of his guitars for the remainder of the performance. Her assessments were consistently accurate, catching subtle tuning issues that might have gone unnoticed, but would have affected the quality of the show. With each correct diagnosis, Sophie's confidence grew, and the audience's appreciation for her remarkable ear became more evident. "Sophie," Elvis said as they finished tuning the last guitar, "I want to ask you something. Would you like to stay up here with me for the rest of the show? I could use someone with your ears to help me sound my best." The offer was beyond Sophie's wildest dreams. Not only had Elvis validated her musical abilities, but he was asking her to be part of his performance. The audience cheered their approval, and Sophie nodded enthusiastically. For the remainder of the concert, Sophie remained on stage, sometimes sitting on an equipment case, sometimes standing beside Elvis as he performed his greatest hits. The audience loved having the young music expert visible throughout the show, and Elvis made sure to include Sophie in the experience, occasionally asking her opinion about the sound or making jokes about having the world's youngest musical consultant. The interaction between Elvis and Sophie became more than just a concert moment. It became a lesson about recognizing talent regardless of age and the importance of speaking up when you know something is wrong. Sophie's courage had not only improved the quality of Elvis's performance, but had also demonstrated to 15,000 people that expertise can come from the most unexpected sources. As the concert neared its end, Elvis made a special announcement. "Before we finish tonight, I want to do something for my young friend Sophie here. This little lady has taught all of us something important tonight, that it doesn't matter how old you are if you know what you're talking about. Sophie, would you like to help me with the final song?" Sophie looked uncertain, but Elvis explained that he wanted her to help him tune his guitar one more time for "Can't Help Falling in Love," ensuring that this final song would be as perfect as possible. It was a small but meaningful role that made Sophie feel like an integral part of the performance. As Elvis sang his closing song, with Sophie having ensured that every string was perfectly tuned, the entire Grand Ole Opry house was filled with a sense of magic that went beyond just the music. It was a moment of connection between generations, between professional expertise and youthful intuition, between a superstar and a fan who had become something much more. When the final notes faded away, Elvis turned to Sophie one more time. "Sophie Martinez, you've got a bright future ahead of you in music, young lady. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you're too young to know what you're talking about when it comes to something you understand this well." The crowd gave Sophie her own standing ovation as her father came to collect her from the stage. Carlos Martinez was beaming with pride as he hugged his daughter, finally understanding that Sophie's musical abilities were not just the imaginative comments of a child, but genuine expertise that deserved respect and recognition. The story of Sophie Martinez and the night she corrected Elvis Presley's guitar tuning spread far beyond Nashville. Music magazines picked up the tale, radio DJs told it on air, and it became one of those heartwarming stories that reminded people that talent and knowledge can emerge from anywhere, at any age. For Sophie, the experience was transformative. The validation she received from Elvis gave her the confidence to embrace her musical abilities fully. She no longer felt the need to hide her observations or apologize for her exceptional ear. Instead, she began to see her gift as something valuable that could contribute to the world of music in meaningful ways. In the years that followed, Sophie's story became an inspiration to young musicians everywhere. Music educators began using her experience as an example of why it's important to listen to young voices and take their observations seriously. The lesson resonated far beyond music, encouraging adults in all fields to pay attention to insights from younger people who might see things that experience had taught older experts to overlook. Elvis himself never forgot Sophie Martinez. In interviews after that memorable night at the Grand Ole Opry, he would often mention the 9-year-old girl who had the courage to speak up when she heard something wrong. He credited Sophie with reminding him that music is about precision and excellence, and that those qualities can be recognized and appreciated by anyone who truly listens. The king's respect for Sophie extended beyond mere words. 6 months after their first meeting, Elvis personally invited the Martinez family to Graceland, where he spent an entire afternoon with Sophie, discussing music theory and allowing her to examine his extensive collection of guitars and other instruments. During that visit, Elvis presented Sophie with her own acoustic guitar, a custom-made instrument crafted by the same luthier who had built guitars for Johnny Cash and Bob Dylan. The guitar came with a personalized inscription, "To Sophie Martinez, who taught the king that the best ears belong to those who listen with their hearts. Elvis Presley, 1977. That guitar became Sophie's most treasured possession, and she would use it throughout her musical education and eventual professional career. The instrument seemed to embody everything Sophie had learned about the importance of precision, attention to detail, and the courage to speak up when something needed to be corrected. Every time she played it, she was reminded of the night that changed her life and the validation she had received from one of music's greatest legends. The guitar that Sophie had helped Elvis tune that night became something of a legend itself. Elvis continued to use it in performances, but he would often tell the story of the young girl who had ensured it sounded perfect. The instrument eventually found its way into the Country Music Hall of Fame, where a plaque tells the story of Sophie Martinez and her remarkable ear for music. Sophie's experience also had a profound impact on her relationship with her family and community. Her father, Carlos, gained a new appreciation for his daughter's abilities and began actively nurturing her musical education, enrolling her in advanced music theory classes and connecting her with professional musicians who could mentor her exceptional talents. Her mother, who had previously worried that Sophie's observations might seem disrespectful, learned to see them as evidence of genuine talent that should be celebrated rather than suppressed. The entire Martinez family dynamic shifted, with Sophie's gift becoming a source of pride rather than concern. The ripple effects of that magical evening extended far beyond the Martinez household. Within weeks of the concert, Sophie began receiving invitations to visit music schools across Tennessee and neighboring states. Professors who had heard about her remarkable demonstration of perfect pitch wanted to study her abilities and understand how such extraordinary musical perception developed in someone so young. The University of Tennessee's music department even offered to conduct a formal study of Sophie's auditory processing capabilities, hoping to learn more about the neurological foundations of exceptional musical talent. Music instrument manufacturers also took notice of Sophie's story. Several guitar companies reached out to the Martinez family, interested in having Sophie test their instruments for tonal quality and tuning stability. They recognized that someone with her exceptional ear could provide valuable feedback about how their products performed under various conditions. One company even offered to create a line of guitars specifically tuned to Sophie's exacting standards, though the family politely declined, feeling Sophie was still too young for such commercial ventures. The media attention surrounding Sophie's story sparked important conversations in educational circles about how to better identify and nurture exceptional talents in children. Music educators across the country began developing new assessment tools and teaching methods designed to recognize students with unusual auditory gifts. Sophie's experience became a case study in music education textbooks, illustrating the importance of taking children's observations seriously and providing appropriate channels for exceptional talents to flourish. At school, Sophie's story spread quickly among teachers and students. The music teacher, who had previously dismissed Sophie's comments about the out-of-tune piano, now regularly consulted with her about instrumental problems in the classroom. Sophie's classmates, many of whom had teased her about being a know-it-all, began to see her musical abilities as something special rather than annoying. The transformation in how Sophie was perceived and treated had a profound effect on her confidence and willingness to share her knowledge. She began helping other young musicians in her school and community, using her exceptional ear to help them improve their performances. Her patient explanations and gentle corrections made her a beloved figure among local music students. Years later, when Sophie had become a respected musician and music educator in her own right, she would often tell her students about the night she met Elvis Presley. But more than just a celebrity encounter, she would frame it as a lesson about the importance of trusting your expertise and having the courage to speak up when you know something is wrong. Her story became required reading in many music education programs across the country, inspiring countless young musicians to trust their instincts and value their unique perspectives. Sophie's teaching philosophy was deeply influenced by her experience with Elvis. She created innovative programs for identifying and nurturing exceptional musical talents in children, establishing scholarship funds for young musicians who showed unusual auditory abilities. Her methods were revolutionary in their emphasis on taking children's musical observations seriously and providing them with the tools and confidence to develop their gifts fully. The Sophie Martinez method, as it came to be known in music education circles, focused on creating supportive environments where young musicians felt safe to share their perceptions about music without fear of dismissal or ridicule. Sophie insisted that her students understand that musical talent wasn't about age or formal training, but about the willingness to listen carefully and trust what they heard. Her approach produced remarkable results, with many of her students going on to successful careers in music performance, composition, and audio engineering. The most important thing I learned that night, Sophie would tell her students, wasn't about guitar tuning or even about music. It was about believing in myself and understanding that knowledge and insight don't depend on age or what other people think. If you know something is right and you can help make something better, you have a responsibility to speak up. The story became a testament to the power of recognizing talent wherever it appears, and the importance of listening to voices that might initially seem unlikely or unexpected. It reminded everyone that expertise can develop at any age, and that sometimes the most valuable insights come from those who see the world with fresh eyes and uncompromised standards. And somewhere in Nashville, in the archives of the Grand Ole Opry, there's still a recording from that magical night. Elvis Presley performing with perfect guitar tuning, thanks to a 9-year-old girl who had the knowledge to identify a problem and the courage to speak up about it, proving that heroes and experts truly do come in all sizes and ages. The recording itself became a treasured piece of music history, not just for Elvis fans, but for educators and musicians who understood the broader significance of what had transpired that evening. Audio engineering students would study the moment when Elvis's guitar tuning was corrected, learning about the subtle but crucial differences that proper intonation makes in a live performance. The recording served as a perfect example of how attention to detail can elevate a good performance to an extraordinary one. Decades later, when digital technology allowed for enhanced audio analysis, researchers were able to demonstrate scientifically just how accurate Sophie's assessment had been that night. The B string was indeed precisely a quarter tone flat, exactly as the 9-year-old had diagnosed in real time without any electronic assistance. This technical validation of Sophie's abilities only added to the legend of her remarkable ear and the courage she had shown in speaking up. The legacy of that night continued to inspire new generations of musicians and music lovers. Sophie's story became a permanent exhibit at the Country Music Hall of Fame, complete with interactive displays that allowed visitors to test their own ability to detect subtle tuning problems. The exhibit challenged people to trust their ears and reminded them that musical expertise could develop at any age with proper attention and courage.